I want to talk to you for a bit about the least restrictive environment. Um, Major concept within special education, and kind of, just in the sense, probably one of the more controversial issues within the field of special education. Um, Largely, it's looked at in two different ways. Meaning kind of dichotomized as ethical versus empirical. So the idea being that, uh, you know, many people would argue that an empirical evidence suggests that we should maintain the least restrictive environment because the evidence shows that the different placements for students are most effective. Um, and then the ethical side of this debate comes down to, it's the right thing to do to include kids within the general education setting. Um, so those are the kind of the big sides of the debate. Um, Also, we need to consider how this could be different in different school settings, um, based on funding, those sort of things, how good the separate classrooms are. My opinion on this is that I don't really believe the evidence is conclusive. So maybe I probably do lean definitely towards the inclusion side, because I don't think we really have enough evidence to say that students going into more isolated settings is effective. Um, and this debate continues, and it's something that you're certainly going to see in the field. It's going to be part of your job. In my experience, the least restrictive environment has never really been done by the letter of the law. It's often based on convenience of the school, I believe, what already exists. A student has this label, well, we have to have this classroom here in the school or over there in a different school for kids with that particular label. This is when you got to remember, the different categories under which kids qualify for special ed. Oftentimes there are classrooms specific to those categories, and that's where largely a student's going to be served. I think this is also a topic where people have to consider, what if it was your own child? How would you feel about that? Excuse me. And interestingly, I've talked to a lot of parents over the years who are very much pro-inclusion, and also parents who are, they don't want their children included because they will get bullied or picked on. One of the saddest realities, I believe, about education in general, and specifically about special education. As far as I'm concerned, that should never be an issue. So, but it is people's reality, and we need to respect that. Also, one thing I want to clarify relative to inclusion is the notion of when people say inclusion, what they actually mean. Because there are varying definitions of inclusion. Many people, when I was teaching, so remember I was teaching in the mid to late 90s, right? And many people believed what the environments I taught in, which really were mainstreaming, and really that's mostly what you see in schools today, where students are, they receive services in a special ed setting, but then they're included in classes like, music and PE and art and maybe some other content area classes, but they do have like a special ed home. Really, that's mainstreaming, and that's not new. That's kind of the I call it not really accurately, but the 1950s model of special education, but that's largely what you see in schools today. But many people will call that inclusion, right? I personally call that mainstreaming. And then, so I think there's a more accurate description of inclusion, meaning that all students home are in the school, or I'm sorry, in the general education classroom, but maybe they're pulled out on occasion for specialized instruction. Okay, so that's maybe a general definition of inclusion. But then there's also the idea of full inclusion, that students are, their home base is general ed, and that special education is a separate place ever does not exist. And everything a student needs is always brought into the general education classroom. Okay. So there are these various definitions, and the topic of least restrictive environment. I mean, most people that I believe, this once again, I try to clarify my opinions and what's not my opinion, but in my experience, I'll say people you meet out in the field are more in support of the traditional LRE, where you maintain the continuum of placements. So, I mean, that's just, in my take on that is that's just reality. But what I always encourage people to consider is that inclusion is not impossible. And my belief is that the best way we can do that is through a model of co-teaching, where general and special ed teachers work together, and kids are all included in a classroom. And the pushback on that I've heard forever in Ohio, in Oregon, in Montana, from state people to administrators, is that the barrier is funding. And that's really a tough thing, because I think it's also priorities. How we want to serve kids, and what we really believe in. And I think even when places have the opportunity to do things like co-teaching, because they have plenty of money, they also choose not to. And I think that is unfortunate. If we had tons of evidence that pulling kids out and giving them all of their instruction in special ed classrooms resulted in great outcomes for kids in special ed, then I may have a different opinion. But that is not my experience, and I don't think there's evidence to support that. You will find some research out there that definitely backs the idea of kids in a specialized setting get better results. But I think that research is very limited, and it's often the case that those pull-out programs that are included in those particular research studies are the best of the best. And do I believe that could be true? Yeah, I do. That kids could have some better outcomes when you have the best case scenario in a specialized classroom. But that's also not reality. Oftentimes, some of the worst teachers are in special education classrooms. So then when we pull kids out, give them to those teachers, it certainly does not make the job easier, because oftentimes you have kids with varying levels of needs and strengths, and it is a very difficult job. In fact, that's largely what I did. I've probably already shared that. But working in a resource room where you have kids spanning 4 grades sometimes, with various needs at different levels, it's really an impossible job. So in wrapping up, that's why my belief leans in the direction of moving towards more inclusive models, because when we isolate kids, it takes you know, a magical situation to be able to serve the needs of all kids. And you know, it's really important that kids have the opportunity to learn from content experts. And in the case of high schools and whatnot, in middle school and you know, even elementary, where you know, you have a math teacher for a reason. You know, why shouldn't kids with disabilities be learning math from a math teacher? But when you put kids in specialized classrooms, you have people like me teaching math, who took, you know, not very many math courses in college, because I'm a special educator, and that has never seemed fair to me. And I think a way we could probably mostly agree on all of this is that there are improvements to be made, and that we should look at the definition of least restrictive environment, and interpret it in a way that serves not only the educational needs of kids with disabilities, but also serves the educational and social needs of everyone in our society, to be exposed to all kinds of different people within the school context. So maybe we'll have better understandings of one another outside of the school context. So thank you very much.